Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes. It is 12:30 on my watch anyway. And today it's Thursday, so I'm joined by JP Mason. It's always an absolute pleasure on a Thursday to talk to you for an hour about Celtic and anything else that crops up, JP. Now, yesterday I was back up at Barra's Art and Design. We have devised a new show called This is Acsom, subtitle being From Barrafield to the Barralands, because we tend to have a player on there who trained up at Barrafield, and we're filming it in the heart of the Barralands, the Barras. And we had a visit yesterday, and I've got to mention this straight off the bat. This is the kind of thing that happens, JP, and it blows me away every time. Never take this for granted. We had a wee visit from a Celtic fan whose mother listens to Acsom, and I love this kind of stuff. Her name is Agnes Hendry, right? She gets called Nana by anyone who knew her, and she used to look after, JP, some of the young Celtic kids. You know how, like, you get digs? I remember it at Dunfermline. They used to have, like, certain places, and it was almost like a young guy. He might have been from the West, but he gets a contract with Dunfermline, so they would put him in digs, and they would basically be looked after by a couple who the club trusted. And I'm pretty sure at Dunfermline, it was the kit man, Mo Hutton. I'm pretty sure him and his wife looked after all these young guys, put them up for a couple of seasons, and obviously sent them on their way. Well, I got the impression that was the situation. And there was a young goalie who was living with this woman who they all called Nana. And she was a massive fan of Arthur Boric, right? So she says to the young kid, any chance I could get a pair of gloves? And he managed to get them, right? Here they are. Look at the size of these things, by the way. Both signed by Arthur Boric. Look at that, right? And Stephen brought them along yesterday and gave us them, obviously, for the Jamie Tierney appeal. So either through an Acsom event or through their big fundraiser in September, things like this will be auctioned off or raffled off to raise much needed funds for wee Jamie. But I wanted to start off with that, JP, because it is so positive when you're just going about your business and then a Celtic fan comes along, absolutely makes your day with an act of random kindness. How amazing is that, by the way?
No, it's the difference, isn't it? That is the difference. But just when you're talking about players staying with like families and stuff like that, I remember. Do you remember you used to get like magazine videos that you could subscribe to, and you'd get them every month? The Man United.
I knew you were coming up with that one. Celtic Collection tried it. We tried it with the Celtic Collection. Only lasted 4 volumes. The Man U one went for ages, didn't it?
The Man U one was like I had a good few videos of the Man United one, but I remember like in the early stages of the class of '92, so it would have been 91, 92 or whatever. There was footage of Beckham, and he was rooming or staying in someone's house, like or some sort of digs where he was looked after, and his room was like, I'm sure he had a poster of Eternal on the wall, not the Spice Girls, which was a bit controversial because obviously, given who he ended up with, and then he'd like written Beckham or Becks on his own boots, like he had like Adidas Predators, and he'd like Tipp-Ex'd his name onto the boot, which was obviously a kind of like, premonition of the fact that one day he would have his own everything really, but his own boot range.
That's right, aye.
That's what I thought of when you were telling that story.
Okay, well, I'm going to expand on that. First thing I want to ask, Eternal, with your musical knowledge, apologies already in the comments. Was that the band that Jamie Redknapp's missus was in?
Louise. Yes.
Right. Yes. Then called Louise Nurding. How do I know that? I have no idea. Right, so he had Eternal up on his wall, right? And there was a similar kind of fly-in-the-wall documentary about that time on the Spice Girls, and they went into Victoria Adams' bedroom, also known as Posh Spice, and she had a footballer up on her wall, and that footballer was Ryan Giggs.
Is that right?
It's a true story, aye.
I didn't know that. That's the other side of the coin, then, isn't it? Wow.
No luck, Bex, but I don't think he was that first, to be honest with you. By the way, that goal that he scored that kind of announced him to the world against Wimbledon, goalkeeper was Neil Sullivan, you'll remember, and he scores this goal. Chalky sets it up, but whose football boots was he wearing that day? JP, do you know the answer? No. I'll tell you whose football boots he was wearing, right? A guy who signed a deal with Adidas Predator before Beckham, Charlie Miller. Charlie Miller. Yep. And Beckham's got the boots, and it's got Miller embroidered into the boots that scored that goal. Charlie Miller.
That's mad.
I know. Just a wee quirk, just a little fun fact for you, right? But it's all about these today. Look at this size. How can you catch a ball with your knee things, by the way? Honestly,
Well,
they're huge.
legend. Boric, what an absolute legend. Remember him getting the champions flag at Ibrox? That was a moment. It was so good.
Why is he such a cult hero? What makes us these guys revered amongst fans?
Boric,
A bit of bad behaviour as well as the brilliance.
I think it was just because he was a bit unhinged. You know how some keepers come along every now and then and they're just a wee bit off the wall. Like, I mean, to a lesser extent, I suppose Steve Dykstra was at Dundee United.
Had a song for him, didn't they?
I just remember his last game when we were all singing that he was a star of a particular genre of film. Yeah. And he kind of like pulled up his shorts to flash his derriere at us, but that was behind the goal, sure, in his last game. But no, Boric was just like, I don't know. I just think he arrived with a bit of pedigree as well. I mean, it wasn't like he was. We seemed like we were getting a good keeper at that time. It didn't seem like, oh, who is this guy? Because surely he was capped by Poland at that point, and wasn't just some obscure guy that had come out of the Polish league. Was he not Legia Warsaw's number one?
Yeah.
I might be wrong on that. And then obviously
we got him on loan, and the reason we terminated the loan and bought him permanently is because Arsenal were sniffing about.
Right.
And they were threatening to nip in and sign him ahead of us. And Strachan got word of that and signed him. So you're right, he had calibre when we got him, JP, no doubt about that.
Yeah. Absolutely no doubt. And then obviously he's just I mean, the fact that he took a penalty and saving the penalty against Louis Saha. Was it Louis Saha? That's right. At Celtic Park. The moments like that just propels you into a kind of different level when you're a player for a club like Celtic. If you do things that are remembered, even one or two things, but I mean, he done several. You know, the Pope John Paul T-shirt at Ibrox and a bit mental, but ultimately, really, what is the harm in that? If you actually break it down, what is the harm?
You're celebrating your religion. Surely in this free society in Scotland, that should be welcomed.
But then there would be an argument back at that saying, well, would it be all right for a Rangers player to lift up a T-shirt with a picture of William of Orange in it or something like that? But does that really equate to that? I'm not entirely sure it does.
They would find a false equivalence in it, I'm sure, JP. I'm sure they would. But, ballsy steel, Arthur Boric. What was the game? Was it Dundee United where he scores a penalty and he does the old jazz hands when he's celebrating? He's not sure what to do because he's obviously not celebrated goals very often. And he does the jazz hands. I loved it.
The penalty save against Spartak Moscow as well to get us into Champions League. And those are huge, huge moments. And he obviously seems to have a genuine affection for the club like he does for Legia Warsaw when you see him in amongst their ultras with the megaphone and all that. Yeah. I mean, that kind of shows that he's maybe cut from a different cloth, or he's certainly a bit grounded when it comes to matters of football.
Yeah, I mean,
he's not sitting eating prawn sandwiches, put it that way. He's quite okay with being in amongst it. And
he was a capo at Ibrox. It was brilliant. He's got the loudspeaker.
Oh yeah. When they had I know they got beaten that game, but when they had the big, they had the tifo. That was amazing.
That was brilliant. But yeah, sometimes it's a bit of bad behaviour. Basically, whatever it is, it's a relationship that a player manages to build with the fan base, and I think it's interesting that we started off with a set of goalie gloves. So here you go. By the way, can I just say the last time that we flashed an item up on Acsom, it was the Ken McDermott jacket. And Paddy Lavery got the ball rolling with the first bid of £100. We managed to get a bid of £500 for that jacket. £500, every single penny of which will go to Jamie Tierney. So it just shows you the power of it. There's a serious side to it, but it does remind you of some of the cult heroes in the past. But goalkeepers are a massive talking point, a huge discussion point at the moment. JP, we're going to be touching on that. I'm also going to tap into it because it's the pre-season. There's no games to talk about, and thus far, no signings or departures to talk about. But it takes me back to the discussion we had with your pal Simon Donnelly last week. And I floated my theory with him. I've been convincing myself for months that if Shay Given stayed at Celtic, we would have won the league under Tommy Burns. That's my theory, right? And I floated it to the bold Sid, who came through the ranks with Shay Given, and he was like, Nah, I'd have picked Stuart Kerr as well. I don't know if you saw it.
I did see that. Yeah. He said I'd have picked Stuart Kerr over Shay Given. And did not say something about, what did he say that held Stuart Kerr back? Something about his
ball at the feet.
Aye.
Yeah, the ball at his feet. This is the thing. As a fan, you've only got so much in terms of the information you can possibly glean. You've obviously got an opinion on things, JP, but we talk about Shay Given and you see what he went to achieve at Blackburn, Manchester City, Newcastle. I think he's an absolute legend at Newcastle. And of course for Ireland. And you just think, oh, imagine that at Celtic. But I think what Simon reinforced was something that when I spoke about a particular player being in and around the Quality Street gang and how amazing it would have been to have them. So for anyone who's not read the book, long out of print, but the Quality Street gang, as you know, an incredible group of players that came after the Lisbon Lions. And in actual fact, they were the third wave of homegrown talent to come through at Celtic Park. So you had like the Kelly kids, the Lisbon Lions, the Quality Street gang. Unbelievable, JP, that you had three generations of footballers all trained up at Barrafield. You know, incredible to think about it. But there was a few guys that slipped through the net, and it's mentioned in the book. So there was a defender called Jim Holton who went on to play for Manchester United in Scotland. 6'2", eyes of blue. Big Jim Holton's coming after you, I think was the chant before my time. But he was up there, didn't get signed. There was a player called Jimmy O'Rourke who went on to be a bit of a Hibs legend. He was up at the training on a Tuesday and Thursday. Celtic never signed him. Kenny Airds made his name at St Johnstone and Hearts. But the big one that stood out for me was Graham Souness. So Graham Souness is up there training with the Quality Street kids. Celtic never signed him.
I didn't know that.
He went down and signed for Tottenham Hotspurs. So he was travelling through to Parkhead. He's training up at Barrafield, pre-moustache, a young Graham Souness. Right? And I said, talking to the guys, I said to them, JP, oh, imagine that. You know, Souness playing in the same midfield as Bobby Murdoch and, you know, the hybrid of the Lions and the Quality Street kids. And what really struck me was the players were like, nah, because it doesn't work like that. Souness had to go down to Spurs and basically be rejected down there, then leave to go to Middlesbrough and find himself at Middlesbrough and become the midfield player that people recognised at Liverpool, you know, winning European Cups. So if he'd gone to Celtic, the path's different. He takes a different path. And I think that's what Sid was saying about Shay Given last week.
Maybe in the same way as Andy Robertson as well. Like Andy Robertson had to go through all of that to be the player that he is now at Liverpool. But that's mad. I didn't know that about Souness.
The history of Scottish football might have been much different had he been signed by Celtic.
It certainly would have. I wonder how it would have gone. But I wonder, there won't be any pictures of him in training gear or anything, because you wouldn't think training gear would even be a thing back then. It's not as if in that time did they have Celtic training gear? This is definitely something you'll know.
This is something, you're right. I am that level of geek. There's a level of geek, and you take it up a few notches, and I'm about there. So they did get changed into Celtic training gear. I mean, I even, like, at that time, researching the book, I spoke to ball boys, JP, straight up. I spoke to people who were ball boys at Celtic Park because I wanted to know exactly what happened the night that George Connolly did the keepy-uppies around Celtic Park. And I interviewed somebody who was a ball boy at the game. So not only did they witness it, they saw the kind of behind-the-scenes thing, because they're in and around. They had their own wee bit that they got dressed in, of course. But they were given full Celtic kits to wear, the ball boys. And when the youngsters were training, it was training kit. You're talking things that had been washed 1,000 times. They were in big hampers and all that kind of stuff. T-shirts, heavy jerseys, you know, that
like
the
leftover stuff at PE. Remember if you
absolutely
got in and you had to go into that room and there was like a bag of stuff just like
bright yellow shorts and all that carry on. Buckter. That was it. So there was training gear. But you raise a good point, right? Because again, sorry to digress a wee bit. We'll get back to the Euros and all that in a minute. But I had to find photographs, of course, for the book. And the first protocol was Celtic. I thought, you know, you've ran the Celtic youth in 65. There's God knows how many pictures. And in the early days, certainly, you employed your own photographer to take the pictures. Right up until the 90s, actually, it was all Celtic photographers. And then pre that, you'll have team groups, you'll have photos lying about the stadium. No. And this is the thing that really saddened me, right? See, when we were redeveloping the stadium, JP, all those images were put in a skip. All those images in 1994 were put in a skip. Now, that for me is sacrilege. It's like, that's history of Celtic Football Club. So then I had to go to the usual places. I had to go to agencies. I went to DC Thompson. I went to the Herald. Brilliant photograph archive, a lot of which isn't digitised. And I got to know a gentleman called Hugh Burt, who was, I was going to say the official photographer. He was a friend of Jimmy McGrory. He was a friend of Jock Stein. And he took all the pictures, basically, at Celtic. And then what you started seeing is things like the young kids training at Barrafield, JP. So there might be an image of the mustachioed one, pre-moustache.
somewhere in the midst of an archive.
Possibly.
Wow. That would certainly ruffle a few feathers, to put it mildly.
Absolutely.
But we love digging up Celtic players and Rangers tops, don't they? Like just this like the Scott Brown one from whatever and all the rest of it. But yeah,
they do. Aye, because again, it's almost as if they're trying to say that, you know, your players will be Rangers fans and all that. Carry on. Talking to Lewis Morgan, a wee bit on the Euros, JP. What does it mean for you? Because we had some great comments coming in. Yesterday was the day, on this day in 1988, that Ray Houghton scored against England. And that was my first Euros, really. That was the first Euros that I remember, that I was right into the football, you know, sticker albums, magazines, the whole thing. And I fell in love with the Ireland team under Jack Charlton. Absolutely fell in love with them. And I fell in love with the Netherlands team, probably because of Ruud Gullit and Marco van Basten. They were just great in the strips, and everything was just brilliant back then. What does it mean to you now? I mean, are you one of these guys that maybe lost a bit of interest when Scotland or Ireland weren't involved?
I mean, obviously, yeah. I mean, you support your national team in the hope that you then get to see them play at a tournament like the World Cup or the Euros. And when you go, basically the whole of my adult life almost, not seen them in any tournament. Like, I mean, I saw a thing on Twitter earlier saying, on this day, where were you 26 years ago today, Scotland, Brazil? And they had the picture of John Collins celebrating the penalty with Darren Jackson.
26 years, GP, 26.
That's right, yeah, 26 years today. And it's a picture of Darren Jackson behind him running towards him going like, and then Paul Lambert's in the background as well, giving it big licks. But you're like, Darren Jackson played in that game against Brazil. That's absolutely wild. That
we need to get him on This Is Acsom. I think Jacko would be a good guest on this.
Definitely. He's one of those guys that like crosses timelines of a period of football, like as football was changing, I would say. But I remember 26 years ago being in Craig Lockhart Halls, or the campus at Craig Lockhart, when I went to Napier, and it was pretty much the last day, or one of the last days of uni, and they had a marquee in the grounds, and they had a screen, and they showed the Scotland-Brazil game, and I remember there was free wine, because me and a few of the folk from my year completely overindulged on free wine, so by full time we were absolutely annihilated. But back in the day, when being 18 and first year at uni and all that, I mean, we'd have probably just gone straight out after it into the town or whatever and gone out to a club or whatever. I mean, try to do that now, I'd be in my bed at like 8 o'clock or whatever. But
yeah, see, a couple of things that springs to mind, JP. Firstly, can you remember what type of wine was it? A nice wee Merlot, or you can't remember?
It was a Sauvignon Blanc, actually.
Oh, I'm impressed. I'm impressed, because it gets to the point where it doesn't matter what it is, really, right? But the other thing I was going to say is Vicky McClure. She's involved in doing stuff for people your age, where it means you do it in the afternoon, and then by 7 or 8 o'clock you're back in the house.
Is it not bad?
They do it bad. They do, eh?
Footage of people crowd surfing at it at the last one, so it obviously got a bit rowdy. Like, they had a DJ in the afternoon. I'm sure the guy, John McClure, is that
Reverend and the Makers?
In the Makers, that his wife?
No, I'll tell you who is married to Vicky McClure. It's Johnny Owens.
Right.
Johnny Owens. Yeah, he done the Three Kings.
Well, your man from Reverend and the Makers was at one of these things. He was
Are they
like
related? Are they
maybe
related?
for every chance. But
Brother, sister, maybe.
but potentially. But I know going back to Scotland, I've always, since going to a game with my dad at Ibrox, actually. Do you remember the Scotland? Was it the under-16s? I think we've spoken about this before.
The World Cup.
Was it the under-16s where they played Saudi Arabia?
Yeah.
And the guys all definitely looked like they were in their mid-40s and smoked 20 a day.
Saudi Arabia, you're talking about.
Yeah.
No, that's right. They were in the nightclubs in Glasgow, weren't they? That you had to be 18 to get into, the Saudi Arabia. And I'm pretty sure there was an investigation many, many years later. Because if you look on the online records, you look on the Scotland players, and it's Brian O'Neill, centre half, and who was it? Paul Dickhoff was in that team, wasn't he? He went to Arsenal. But the one that always stood out for me was Ian Downey. He scored in the final. And he was with Aberdeen at that time, but his dad was our football coach at High Valleyfield. Ian played with Aberdeen, Forford and Fenlon, and then probably went junior after that. But the funniest thing about it was being a Valleyfield boy obviously stole the match ball, didn't he, for the World Cup final. And that match ball, JP, ended up getting used by an under 13 or 14 team at Valleyfield. Training until every panel of it was hanging off. That was a World Cup final, Adidas Tango football. And we ended up using it because Ian's old man, also Ian, brought it in.
My grand's maiden name was Downey. I wonder if there was any. You don't hear too many. I don't know. Maybe I'm naive to it, but you don't hear of too many Downeys. I don't know the name Downey that well, but she would always tell me that her parents were from the County Cavan. Like, she was so proud to be of Irish descent,
Could well be a link there, JP. Could well be a link. I'm keen to get everybody's thoughts on everything in relation to Celtic transfer ins and outs, and also obviously the Euros as well. What you're going to be looking forward to. It is great to see Scotland back in it, second time running in the Euros. One thing about that Brazil game that you again sprung to mind when you were talking about it, I remember the national anthem and the cameras going down the team, right? And it comes to Collins and he winked at the camera. You remember that? Just class. And a lot of people, I think, thought that Collins, because he was a class player, no doubt about it, a class player on a pretty poor Celtic side. But I don't know, you get a perception of the type of person he is. But then he done that gig for us in October, November last year, and he was just sound, just a really sound guy.
He came to that Eric Dimeco Oasis gig at Tuts. And Eric Dimeco introduced me to John Collins. Like, I present to you, John Collins. I present to you, and I'm like, you're going to present John Collins to me? I'm like, well, this guy was like my hero when I was a wee.
So did they play together in France or against each other in
Monaco.
France? Yeah,
they played at Monaco.
They played at Monaco, right.
And then, like, talking to John Collins, like, obviously I lived in France for my uni course in 24 years ago. That's insane. And obviously went to Monaco as a wee guy, like, eyes just absolutely popping out of my head at the sights of Monaco. And I did think about John Collins when I was there. I was like, God, John Collins lived here and played football here. And then to speak to him about it, and he was just like talking about the contrast of going from training at Barrowfield to training in Monaco's facilities. And then you look at the team that he played in, it was like Thierry Henry, Trezeguet as a youngster coming through, Emmanuel Petit, Barthez in goals, Eric Dimeco, and imagine that kind of leap. It must have just been like a total, complete and utter lifestyle change, football for him as well, and he deserved it, to be fair, because he played so well for us. He deserved it.
And he was so committed. I mean, again, going back to the old Valleyfield days, one of the boys that played in our team signed for Celtic on an S form. And I think it was maybe a pre-season, or basically they're living in a hotel and he was in a room with Collins. And, he's sitting on his bed watching the telly, eating a packet of Monster Munch or whatever, JP, as footballers do. And Collins is doing sit-ups. He's just doing sit-ups. He wouldn't even sit and watch the telly. He would watch the TV whilst he was doing sit-ups. He was absolutely committed to his fitness and all the rest of it. I asked him about that, actually. And he said it was because he was wee. He basically, he was at Celtic Boys Club as a kid. Celtic thought he was too wee. He goes to Hibs, makes his name for himself, but he always felt he had to work harder and try harder and get stronger. And by the time he signs for Monaco, the boy is a class act. But you know, the final in 1998, you're talking about the World Cup there. Obviously, Brazil get to the final, they play France. I watched that at T in the Park on the big screens at T in the Park. The final was screened on one of the days at T.
What was that? 98. That was my first T. It was my first T in the Park. The headliners were Pulp and The Prodigy. That was my first T. Remember seeing Robbie Williams as well on the NME stage.
He had a Travis Bickle haircut.
And the Adidas tracky top. Because in the highlights, it's Billy Sloan's interviewing him as he's walking to stage, like asking him questions, and then he does the whole to camera. He does this sort of shadow box into the camera, and he's like, "You talking to me? You talking to me?" He does the Travis Bickle.
You've got some memory. See now, if T in the Park was to return, it would be Declan McConville as Billy Sloan, wouldn't it? Declan would be the guy. Yeah, he would be getting the Vox props. He would. The reason I mentioned that is somebody sent me a screenshot this morning of Amy Canavan doing the Scotland coverage over in Germany. She's an absolute genius. She's brilliant. It's super.
I saw her post some light reading on the way to Germany, and you're like, wow, that's brilliant to be able to go actually go under the banner of being a reporter. And
was it one of my books that she was reading? No, JP.
It was a Steve Clark book. So unless
we'll move on
in the last week, then no.
Oh, that's right. It was Nutmeg, wasn't it? With Steve Clark on the front.
Yeah. Aye, but no, that's absolutely brilliant. I mean, you kind of did call it very, very early with her, and sort of said she's going to go places, and it's great to see her. Great to see her do that, and what an experience! I've obviously never been to. Well, I mean, I went to one of the games at Hampden in 2020. It was it would have been 2021. It was the first game that I went back to, a football match that I'd been to since March 2020. So it'd been like June 2021 when they did the socially distanced games. Yeah. And I went to Sweden, Ukraine. And even though it was a competitive game, obviously, but I had no real massive love for Sweden or Ukraine, but it was so good to be at a football game again. So, but I would obviously love to go to a Euros or a World Cup supporting Scotland. It would be great. But it's one of those ones. It's the people that have got the tickets. Hopefully, the people that have got the tickets for these games are the people that deserve them. The people that travel, to a Scotland friendly against Estonia in the middle of November or something like that. Those people should be at those games. I mean, if the Johnny come latelys that just get their hands on briefs for these massive games just because it's the glamour and they've got the access to it, kind of sticks in the craw a little bit. But
yeah, I'd agree with that, JP, and you're right. There's people who are committing massive sums of money and massive parts of their year into following Scotland. So yeah, they absolutely deserve to go and see them when the big games come along. Here we go. Acsom taking their time, says George Kidd. Checking VAR. You sent that at 12:29. We still had about 30 seconds to get on live, George, and I think we just made it by the skin of our teeth. Urban Culture. I hate bad timekeepers. You don't get this with Gers TV. I wouldn't know. I have never tuned in to Gers TV. And Jungle Line, rumours doing the rounds this morning that the boys section are getting their own safe standing section. Did you see that? There's been a planning application put in for something like 455 seats to be removed, turned into the rail section. So we would have two standing sections separate. Now, I'm all for it, but remember the plan to have the Celtic end, everybody in a standing section and a safe standing section in the Celtic end.
I think that was a bit too ambitious, really. If you actually think about put everything to one side, you're asking a lot of people to sacrifice their seat on a permanent basis. I
know.
I kind of get that. I don't think it's over the top to ask somebody to move for one game, for example. Like, I've always kind of sort of been of the thinking that when we go to another ground, if there's somebody that sits in their own seat that could move to accommodate and basically make more money for their club, if it happened to me and Celtic Park was 90,000 capacity and a team was coming that could bring 10,000 fans and I had to move to accommodate that, I would do it if it meant that it was going to be more money for my club. But actually moving permanently, there's a lot of different so many conversations to be had there. So maybe this is the compromise, and they have the two standing sections. I mean, they might as well. All those guys all sit together anyway, so they might as well put something in to accommodate them.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this season for me, JP, was very, very unfortunate with regards to the relationship between the club and the ultras, because we know what happened. And I was just talking to my brother earlier today about how sometimes if you're the person or the group to stand up for the oppressed minority, then you're basically, you're shouted down. And I think that's what happened to the Green Brigade this season. The big example I gave, I found myself in a Belfast airport in January, JP, right? Now, you are a troubadour, right? You're a traveller and you do all that. January, age 45, was the first time, right, I was either trusted or brave enough to be in an airport on my own, to get on a plane myself. 45 years of age. First time ever, right?
I can tell you my first time.
You're probably about 14.
No, it was March 2000, and it was when I was living in Nice, and Celtic were in the League Cup final, and I flew back myself for the game. I'd only been living there for like a month, and I came back for like a long weekend. So I flew back on the Friday, and then was back, I think, on the Sunday night. But I came back for the barnstormer, blockbuster, rip-roaring, quite boring 2-0 final against Aberdeen. Kenny Dalglish, the manager.
Right, goal scorers.
Tommy Johnson and Vidar Reset.
And I think I've got that video somewhere on the shelves there behind me, JP. But
it's a game.
Yeah, they sold the video. They sold the video of that game. That's how desperate we were. Seriously.
I didn't
what was
know
more desperate? The fact they sold it or the fact that I've got it? I'm not quite sure. But I found myself in January this year, for the first time, in an airport on my own. Now, I'm a country bumpkin. I'll take that all day long. But I bought Sinead O'Connor's book, and it was sensational, right? But you'll remember back in the day where she was on SNL, biggest TV show at the time on American TV, and she was flying. She'd just won a Grammy. I do not want what I haven't got. I know you're a big fan of Sinead O'Connor. I've always loved Sinead O'Connor. Obviously, she'd had the worldwide hit, Nothing Compares to You, the cover of the Prince song. Also, check out Chris Cornell's version. There is a point to what I'm saying here, by the way. But she went out there and she ripped up a picture of the Pope. Remember that? And it was just, but what she was actually doing when you read her book, the picture of the Pope had been in her mother's house, omnipresent in her mother's house, right? She was horrifically, physically abused for years as a child, right? Not sexually, physically abused as a child. And she's looking at that and she's gone, right, Catholicism, you might be good, you're doing this to your kid, blah, blah, blah. So she was kind of puzzled with the whole religion thing. But the reason she did it was a stand against the child abuse within the Catholic Church. She stood up, live telly, ripped up the picture of the Pope, booed. And then she appeared at the Bob Dylan anniversary gig later that month, or maybe a couple of months later, and she was booed again, and she did that a cappella version of War. And she took a stand against what was happening, JP, and she was vilified, and she ended her mainstream, trajectory, if you like. Obviously, she continued to sing, record, perform, but never to the same level of, success. She knew that's what she was going to do that night, but she did it anyway because she wanted to stand up for the oppressed, in that case, kids who were being abused. She later on duetted with Ian Brown on a song that calls out attacks on Afghanistan, Palestine, the whole thing. Years before what happened,
illegal attack. That's a tune, actually.
Illegal attack, absolutely. So I think the Green Brigade, see, there is a point, coming back to it, are now, in terms of, we already knew it, we spoke about it at the time, JP, we supported what their message was. Down the line, months down, I mean, it's incredible to believe that the club actually banned them for standing up for the rights of the oppressed. It still irks me that happened this season.
Has that been actually clarified that was the reason? Because it's not a good look for Celtic to admit that that is why they banned the Green Brigade, because of support for Palestine. I mean, that game was a Champions League game, wasn't it? What was the Champions League game we played? Was it Atletico Madrid? Was that when they did the sort of really massive show of support where flags were handed out right around the ground? I think it was Atletico Madrid, and it was really powerful when it really kind of, as much as the banner that was raised on the 7th of October obviously didn't paint us in a good light, given the timing of it and everything else, the fact that that was just a universal support for, clearly we could see what was going on, still going on. So wouldn't it be a good look if they were to be like, all right, that's why we banned you, even though you struggle to find anybody. Well, maybe not in Glasgow. There's certainly enough people in Glasgow that have this sort of weird support for Israel, even though they probably don't know what's going on. You struggle to find anyone nowadays that isn't pro-Palestine, in terms of, well, how could you not be, given what we've seen in the last 6-7 months? But yeah.
No, you're right. But as I say, you put yourself out there, and you're going to be vilified by the mainstream, and that's exactly what happened at the time to them as well. Big shout out to Glowboy for supporting the channel. Thank you very much. And Donny Tiny Hands, need to fix the damage done by Mark Lowell this window. The reason I'm bringing this up is very interesting discussion with Jackie the other week, Jackie McNamara, because he had the experience, JP, of being a player who was traded by clubs. He then moved into management and he was trading players. And then, of course, he had the experience at York as a CEO of a football club. So the discussion around transfers and all that, and how to undo bad transfer windows, it can take a long time. I mean, Donny's right. We're going to have to undo quite a few bad transfer windows as well. And, we're hearing a lot of chat around guys like Lagerbielke. I've seen a list this morning. No surprises, Kobayashi, Siegrist, McCarthy. But one of the names on there might be one for discussion, and that's O. So there's interest in Belgian from Belgian club Genk, I think it is, who want to take him. What do you think about that? Because at this moment in time, we've only got 2 strikers, right? Kyogo and O. It's certainly not a done deal when it comes to either. I think Norwich are playing hardball with the transfer fee on that one, because we didn't have an option to buy, so it wasn't all set, etc. But I'd love to see either come to the club, and even then, I think we need 3 strikers. You move O on, we've got 1. So it looks as though he's out the building. It looks as though Rodgers doesn't fancy him, JP.
Well, he wasn't even in the conversation in the last 3 or 4 months of the season, was he? He didn't get any of it. There's no way he was injured that whole time, because like people always ask the manager at press conferences, what's the latest of the squad and things like that. I don't recall him ever saying anything about O at all, or even being asked about him. It's almost like they've started before the press conferences started. They've been like, just no questions about O either way, because we've got nothing to say. So I don't know. I didn't see enough from the guy to warrant me being overly upset if he was to leave. There was flashes of potential there and everything else, but Brendan Rodgers is the manager, and if the manager's not willing to hang his hat on a guy in a period of time when you really need him, and you really need him to step up in the same way that Ida stepped up when you needed him, then I don't think there's any point in him being at the club. So even if it does leave us short in the interim, we've got to be, and say the Ida thing doesn't happen, there's got to be other names that are on a list. You would imagine Miofsky would be one of them. Yeah. Just because it's kind of well known that he was sought after in January, and then whatever the reason was, whether it was because Aberdeen couldn't get a replacement or whether they couldn't get the fee to be what they wanted it to be, but there was definitely something going on there between Celtic and Miofsky in January. Is it going to be the case like Scott McKenna years ago, where it was just interest and then it never goes any further? We'll see. I think Miofsky put something cryptic on his Instagram, as players like to do, with something about something pointing to the future with an egg timer, that old chestnut. It's either a set of eyes or it's an egg timer or a plane emoji or something like that.
Oh, I know.
I guess I get that there's the temptation to do that when you're obviously a high-profile footballer and everything else, and you've got however many thousand followers. There will be the temptation to sort of, cast the line out a little bit to see who you can reel in. But
Do you think they're advised? Do you think they're advised to do it by their agents?
maybe
Yeah.
like because obviously we're talking about it. It was
Mhm.
it generated publicity to the point that there was news stories about it. So, aye, maybe, but I don't know. I prefer when people go about their business on the QT, and then it'll just be a case of one day, bang, there he is with a Celtic strip, or not.
That's
But,
how
yeah.
I love the fact Forrest and McGregor don't have the socials. I love it. I do. On the one hand, I get and I understand when it comes to a player as a brand. The first person ever to sign for Celtic who had an image rights clause in his contract was Paolo Di Canio.
You were going to say that.
And so it gets to the point where whatever Celtic sold in the shop, if it had Di Canio's likeness of image, he would get a cut. There was an agreement where we had to sell a single, you'll remember it, D.I. Canio, to the tune of D.I.S. You'll remember that horrific single. By the way, David Lowe had something to do with that. I need to ask him the next time I speak to David. David Lowe had something to do with that single. So back in the 90s, we see the introduction of a player as a brand, I guess, JP. And now I think the socials are probably drummed into them by their agents, and you've got to do this, and you've got to have this amount of followers, and it's going to help you with sponsorship and profile and all this kind of stuff. But is it necessary? Is it a necessary evil, or is it necessary at all? Because you've used the emoji examples there. I mean, we've had it with Yakimakis, we've had it with Julien. Who else? There's been a few. I mean, Haksabanovic, it's the reason he's not at the club, because of his Instagram post.
Odin Thiago home.
Yeah.
Just stay down, be humble. I know it was like song lyrics, but even still, it didn't look good. And
No.
I would imagine, as we speculated at the time, I would imagine someone within Celtic has just went, here, wee man, and get that down, and didn't be putting stuff like that up on your social media because, well, there's a certain blonde-haired guy that plays for a certain club who's given them enough reason to be annoyed about him, and he's their player.
Yeah.
Like, so, do you know what I mean?
The thing is, JP, if they're going to do it right, then the club need to embrace it insofar as having a liaison officer who deals with social media at the club, because players can get themselves into trouble. And it's been shown, like, with Haksabanovic, Odin Home. I remember calling it out, Lee Griffiths. I remember saying, take his phone off him, man, because his social media output was a joke. It wasn't professional at the time. But we did, and this wasn't me leading into this, we did discuss this with Bobby Petta yesterday. Bobby Petta is the third guest on This Is Acsom. It's going out on Friday night. And quite a few revelations, actually, Bobby. But he has a dig at a current Celtic player for their social media output. So tune into that. He also tells us about the time Ange Postecoglou tried to sign him as a player. So work that one out.
Wow.
Ange Postecoglou tried to sign Bobby Petta. So we talk about that as well. Good guy, Bobby. Had a good laugh with him as well. Joe Hamilton is in on the chat. This window will show us if Brendan is DD's man, or if Peter Lawwell still has the power to hold our club back. Right. I know it's easy to blame everything on Peter Lawwell, JP, right? And I've been critical in the past. You just need to type in Lawwell to the YouTube channel. There's been plenty of criticism in the past. He's the chairman of the football club. So I think we've got to take that into account. I know what the default response to that is. Is he, though? And when you speak to when Peter Lawwell came back to the club, he never left. That's always the default response to that. But surely, if we are seriously looking to progress as a football club, your chairman's not calling the shots over transfers.
You would hope so. You would certainly hope so. I don't. Maybe people will be like, "Oh, you're naive or whatever," but I don't believe that it's some sort of penny pinching kind of. He's this like overlord that walks into a room and tells people how to do things, and it's his way or the highway and all this sort of stuff. I just don't really believe it. Also, from speaking to a few people, players, ex-players, they all say that Peter Lawwell's a massive Celtic fan and wants the best for Celtic. Yes, has he done things in the public eye that aren't great? Like that interview during COVID was not great at all. Sometimes you get the feeling he might not.
He wrote the questions in that interview, didn't he?
Aye. Sometimes you get the feeling he might not be able to read a room really that well, but he's done unbelievable things for this football club in my lifetime. So I can't sit here and absolutely like leather the guy. The banner at Pittodrie in January or start of February was very relevant. On your heads be it. I remember that. Seeing that, and they were right, because ultimately, had we lost the league this season, that would have given massive impetus, and it would have given these people that, and I say these people, there's a lot of them, people that think that Celtic are just want to have Rangers at arm's length, and almost like a wee kid just sort of running into the palm of your hand, like angry. that's how they want it. And to be honest, that's not a bad way to be as a football club, but you kind of want them not to have any contact with the hand at all, and they're at the other side of the room in the corner screaming into a void. Mm-hmm. That's how far away you want to be from them, really. So there's an opportunity now where the cards are so stacked in our favour to be able to comfortably go and spend money and really put a hell of a lot of distance between us and them, because you look at the type of signings they're bringing in and we can eclipse that in one day. Mm-hmm. And that's not being like sort of ballsy or anything like that, or bullshit or whatever. It's just being honest, and they know that. We know that. The figures are all there. It's not as if our revenue is like made up. It's not as if they can turn around and go, oh well, they say they've got all this money. It's like, no, I'm sorry, we actually do have this money, and if we spend it the way that all of the supporters want us to spend it, then I would be fearful. But it's over to us to actually do that, and like Joe said in the comment, give the manager the carte blanche to sign the people that he wants to sign, and not have projects pushed upon him or favours to agents or anything like that. It's got to be the right player, the right profile, right mentality. I sound like Brendan Rodgers. The right mentality, the aggression, the speed.
The thing is, you need to do the hand movements that he's got constantly doing that with his hands. But you're right, JP. The mentality one's massive. It gets to the point sometimes where you can start using these words and they become almost like wallpaper. You stop noticing the meaning of them. But I think the mentality was a huge one. And I remember saying after the pre-season the last campaign, we didn't need to sign all those guys, because then you've got a third of a squad who might not have the right mentality for the fight that we.
And they didn't because they weren't allowed. They weren't even allowed in the ring to fight. Yep. They didn't even have a set of gloves. They were as far away from the ring as there you go. They were as far away from the ring as possible.
No, they're right.
They weren't given the opportunity to be involved.
And that's the mentality. That's the mentality. So, like, going back to the Euros, you've got a guy like Tony Ralston who has got a mentality. I think that if you could bottle it and give it to every player, JP, honestly, I mean, you think about the downtime that guy's had to consider his career in football, particularly that period of time prior to Ange coming in, of a year and a half where he was kind of ridiculed. He'd been given a bumper new deal after his introduction by Brendan Rodgers, and he played pretty well. I always remember I don't think the picture of him and Neymar has aged that well, but he made an impression that season, didn't he? And he got the big deal. He was still at the club. He wasn't featuring, non-contributing player, which I hate because I just think they're a drain on resources. So no one would have, flinched if he had gone during that period. No one. No. So as an individual, the mentality that boy must have is incredible. It really is incredible to be able to be ready for when Ange Postecoglou comes in and he's got to play. And by the way, he could have just been a stopgap until a new right back was signed. but he showed Ange Postecoglou, actually, no, I want to compete. I want to be part of this. And he's still an important part of the squad, to the point where he's waited for his shot. He's going to be the first choice right back for Scotland at the Euros. I think that's tremendous. Fair play to Tony. And I say it, and it's not even tongue-in-cheek. Tony Ralston's my favourite player. And it comes down to that mentality, not the technical ability. He's never given up, JP. I admire that.
Kind of old school, isn't it? It's like, if you're talking about players in the past who were, big Celtic fans who wanted to be at the club for the right reasons and trained well, get their head down, and were ready to be called upon when required. And I'm sure you could list off a huge amount of names of guys that were exactly like that in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, who were just not going to throw the toys at the pram if they didn't get a game, and obviously watched numerous players be signed in their position, either on loan, well, mostly on loan, really, in Celtic's place. I mean, think of the amount of right backs that have come in the 6-7 years that Ralston's been there.
I know.
Maurice Bauer, Jeremy Toljan, Jeremy Frimpong.
Don't forget John Joe Kenny.
John Joe Kenny as well. So he's seen off a lot of guys that have come in with a bit of a reputation, a bit of a name, pedigree, if you want to call it that. I mean, Toljan, Borussia Dortmund.
Yeah. €8 million signing for Borussia Dortmund.
John Joe Kenny, Everton, Premier League team. So, I know I'm delighted for him that he's in among, because I think what that will mean to him to play in that game tomorrow.
It's incredible. It really is. It is. It's brilliant, and I'm delighted for him. But you're right. You go back to the 60s, it's probably guys like Charlie Gallagher, Willie O'Neill, Jim Brogan, always there or thereabouts in the squad, never the star player. But when required, when called upon, come in, do a job, low maintenance, never complain. John Fallon. How long was John Fallon at Celtic? 12, 13 years. Very rarely like the first choice for an entire season. But when called upon, came in, did a job. Afternoon all, says Paddy Lavery from our soaking wet Ardoyne.
And is included in the song, there's Fallon, Young and Gemmell. I mean, like you say, a guy that didn't play all the time is immortalised in song.
And by the way, a big shout out to John. I know he's been in hospital recently, so a Lisbon Lion, John Fallon, all the best to you as well. Phyllis Kirk, I hope Acsom is right, but you said the same last summer, yes we did, about lots of time left in the window, and look what happened. That's maybe why, over the last couple of weeks, JP, we've been reiterating it time and time again. We cannot make the same mistakes this time round. The team that won the double last season, what an incredible effort that was. But it's going to be different this time round. Is Liam Scales going to play 50 games this season? Is James Forrest going to have the impact this season? There's moments there that you think, right, that was last season, and we need to strengthen and bolster the squad this time round. I'd love to see Bernardo. I thought over the piece made an impact at Celtic last season. I'd love to see either both of those players sign permanently. There's no guarantee it's going to happen. So we need to be active, but also patient, because it's not a case of, right, every single time after a certain period, JP, that Celtic put something out about a player's birthday or a new strip, and then you look underneath and the comments are just announcer signing, times 1,000, announcer signing. There is that, the gratification aspect of social media and all that is alive, and it is there, the pressure. I'm not saying that we pressurise Celtic into making bad decisions, but we do need to be patient, I think. I think that, even if what we get happens with regards to a percentage of them being permanent and maybe a couple of more loan deals, I think I could handle that.
Well, in contrast to last summer, Brendan Rodgers has been here since, a year. He's been here a year now, so to June last year. And he's had a season or a year to find out relationships with players, to establish relationships with players, to be able to speak to a player to go, look, do you want to go? Or like, if a player goes to him and says, say it's Matt O'Reilly, and says, yeah, look, I think it's the right time for me to look for a new club, then he is going to have known that long before us. and will already have actually started to put lists together of players in certain positions where he was like, well, I need a starter in that position, I need a backup in that position. So those conversations surely have already happened to the point that we're going into this window with a manager who's been here for a year, who's now won a league title and the Scottish Cup, and has that authority to be able to say, right, well, I need this player for this position. And we've been talking about it. We've got this list. We can then go and approach the players. I just don't think like you always say, there's always a story and there's always the truth always comes out. It would be really, really interesting to know the absolute truth of last summer's transfer window and where all those players, how they ended up at Celtic, who really, really wanted them, and who signed them off.
I think there's a book in the season where we lost the league in terms of the transfer, and you know, we got information. We got information just about from the horse's mouth in relation to the signings that Neil Lennon wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
Now, and by the way, it's easy to say I wanted this and I wanted that, and some of them you're looking at the list and you're thinking, seriously, I mean, he wanted Fraser Forster, everybody knows that, right? And we got Barkas. He did want Tony, and he got Ajeti, right? But again, there's no guarantee we could have got Tony. I know he was in the building, I know the stories, but there's no guarantee we could have signed him. He wanted to sign Charlie Mulgrew. JP, I kid you not, Neil Lennon wanted to sign Charlie Mulgrew for the push for the 10. And again, there's a few other names. I need to dig out the list. I was given a list of players that we wanted to sign. Danny Drinkwater was one of them. There was a list of players that Neil Lennon wanted to sign, and he's presented with some of the guys that he inherited. So at the time, I think very critical, because you blame the manager. You blame the manager for bad signings, don't you? But then the real story comes out, and then you're thinking, right, okay, partly to blame, but maybe not fully to blame. Here we go. We're going to be bringing on a few more of these comments, but before I do so, JP, right, we mentioned yesterday about the origins of the Fields of Athenry in terms of it being sang at Celtic games, and I got a message from Bill Stewart. Thanks for getting in touch, Bill. Regarding the Chris Morris Fields of Athenry, I've told you this before. Chris Morris claims that he introduced it, right? Brilliant, love it. I was at the Pennycook CSC, says Bill Stewart, in 1988-89 at the Fairmile Inn in Edinburgh. Is that still there? Fairmile Inn? Not familiar with it.
I don't know.
Where Chris Morris did sing an Irish ballad, much to the confusion of the Celtic fans. LOL. Couldn't confirm if it was indeed the Fields. Peter Grant was also there. So the plot thickens. And the people that were coming in yesterday on the comments were saying, I can't remember hearing it before the centenary season. So it is definitely within the realms at the moment of possibility that indeed Chris Morris introduced it to us Celtic fans. Someone else came in and said, no, it was Pat Bonner. If we can hold on to those that we want to keep, I think 4 starters is all we need. Maybe for a starting 11, but for squad depth, I'm not so sure. Nordman Culture. Phyllis Kirk, can't see Celtic doing anything different this summer. Won't be a significant spend or anything of the sort. Thanks for just bringing us right back down there, Phyllis Kirk.
Okay, let's ask the question right now on June 13th, the day before the transfer window opens. How much do you think Celtic will spend between now and August 31st or whenever it is?
Net spend or?
Not net spend. How much do you think we'll actually shell out on players?
36 million.
Really?
Yes.
Seriously?
Mm-hmm.
Wow. All right. That's not
million.
what I was expecting. Okay.
Specific figure.
That's a specific amount. And you would expect a significant amount of that 36 to be on a goalkeeper, probably.
Yes. And that's why I think, if we sign 4 permanent players, even if one of them is Bernardo and one of them is Ida, if we sign 4 and we bring in 2 on loan, JP, I think it's a good transfer window. And we do need to get rid of the players that are non-contributing players. And there are loads of them. We need to move them on. I mean, moving on guys like Haksabanovic, Kobayashi, McCarthy, see, that's your priority. You can then question whether or not Welsh is part of your plans, etc. You can move into the realms of that. But the non-contributing players, move them on. I think 36 million quid on 4 players and we bring in another 2 on loan, people will go into a meltdown saying that I'm off my head. We're going to bring in a lot of money. Even if you get rid of, you're talking O, for example, they're still talking 3 to 3.5 for O, 1.8 for Haksabanovic. So other guys, you're not going to get any cash for, JP, but they're still valuing some of their players. Tilio, right? So if you sign a guy for $1.5 million to $2 million from an Australian club, you're not going to give him back to a club in Australia for free.
No.
So there will be 6 or 7, maybe £8 million of transfer fees, without mentioning Matt O'Reilly, coming in of your surplus to requirement players. Mm-hmm. And that, again, will, as I say, 36 million won't be net spend, will it? It will be overall gross. So, yeah, that's my prediction. What about yourself? We'll come back to this.
I was going to say 25. I'd say 25. But I would be happy if it was 36 and it was spent correctly. Absolutely.
Yeah, we'll come back to this, JP. It was a good question to finish off. Thanks, everybody, for getting involved. We are going to launch episode 3 of This Is Acsom. It's a weekly show. We're going to be doing it every single week. That's us started now. We're not going to finish. And we have a special guest every week. We're starting off with some ex-Celts. This week is Bobby Petta. I've got a list here of about 30 different guests that I want on the show. And we'll ask every single one of them to appear. And hopefully they will all come on and talk about not only their Celtic memories, but their opinions on the here and now, what's happening in the transfer window or whatever is happening during the period that they're on the show. I'm really enjoying it. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the episodes. Hit the notifications bell. Give us a big thumbs up on this video. And also, in the past, we have won, over the last 6 years, 6 national awards, JP, for Acsom, for various different things that we've done, from the charitable initiatives that we've been involved in right through to content creation. And, I'm greedy and it would be nice to win another one. So if you want to vote for any of the numerous categories, then the link is underneath this video. But in all seriousness, what actually happens is it allows you to raise awareness for the important things, JP, because what I've always found down there is you're rubbing shoulders with big media companies. It's not an alternative media award ceremony. Big media companies, you meet a lot of people, sponsorship gets offered to you, etc., on the back of these things, and it allows you to grow the channel, which then allows you to increase the awareness of things that we're supporting, like St Mary's, the birthplace of Celtic Football Club, Jamie Tierney, the wee boy from Rosyth, who's got an incurable condition that hopefully we can help him with in the years to come. So yeah, that's the reason that it's always great. But it's nice to go down and rub shoulders with all the folk down south as well, JP.
When is it?
Where? Did you say where?
When?
Good question. So they're taking nominations now. I've shared the link underneath this video, but I'm not even sure. Was it maybe October, November last year? We did it last time round down at Anfield.
All right, yeah.
And my suggestion to them was bring it up to Scotland. There's some great, like we mentioned Amy earlier on. Amy's a phenomenal broadcaster. She's going to have a great career, but there's so many people like that in the world of Scottish football, and I just think come up here. One final big shout out, and it's to our very own Jerry, who's not on today, but Jerry Taylor today is 10 months sober. So brilliant. And I know that lots of people get in touch with Jerry who might be suffering similar demons or issues or worries or concerns. And Jerry's always there to help you out. So again, you can increase awareness, JP, if you increase your audience. And that's what it's all about. So thanks everybody for getting involved. Where are you watching the game tomorrow night, JP?
In Anstruther in Fife, believe it or not.
I used to go on my holidays there. Right? I mean, some people didn't have Sky TV when they were younger, but me, I didn't even leave Fife for my holidays, mate. I used to go to Anstruther.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to going back. I'm looking forward to going back. I'm actually staying in a place called Kilrenny, or I think it's called Kilrenny, nearby. Apparently, it's not that far from Anstruther, but yeah, it's my pal's birthday on Saturday night, so I'm the DJ in Anstruther, and yeah, looking forward to getting a chippy and maybe getting one of those fudge donuts as well. Hopefully there's, I can't remember the name of the company that makes them, but it's something and something. It's a famous bakery in that neck of the woods, and they do these fudge donuts that are absolutely next.
Yeah, come to Fife. This is the message. Come to Fife. Just be careful if you walk into a local boozer. Never ask what the star on the wall is or that kind of stuff, JP, because it gets a bit strange past midnight here in Fife. As I say, thanks everybody for getting involved. Always a pleasure. Enjoy the game tomorrow night. We'll be back tomorrow at 12:30. And all that's left for me to say is thank you once again, JP Mason, for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.